Hi, I'm David Marlin and welcome to this short video on some aspects of winter horse care. Now, for most horses and ponies, a little bit of cold weather doesn't present much of a challenge. Provided they're warm, dry, they've got some shelter and they've got access to plenty of forage, most horses are absolutely fine. But there are horses that the cold weather presents a challenge for, and I'm going to go through some of the things that I get asked quite regularly when things turn cold. So the first thing is about soaking hay in winter, and of course if you're soaking hay, this could be for a number of reasons. It could be because your horse has got asthma. It could be more likely because you're trying to manage weight loss or manage weight and increase weight loss, or your horse is prone to laminitis. And so it's important in the winter to realize that soaking in colder water removes less of the water soluble carbohydrate, the sugars and starch. So you can see here, this is a study from Annette Longland from 2013, and she soaked hays at 8, 16 and 49 degrees centigrade. The 49 was initially sort of hot water, tap hot water. It wasn't at 49 for the whole time. But you can see that it makes a big difference whether you use 8 degrees centigrade or 16. It doesn't make so much difference if you put on hot water. 16 is absolutely fine, but 8, the removal of reduction in water soluble carbohydrate was much less at the lower temperature at 8 degrees centigrade. So worth remembering that if you are trying to manage a horse that has a problem with weight or is prone to laminitis. Now, one of the other things that we're often concerned about in cold weather is the fact that we know horses drink less water when it's cold compared to if that water's warm. And we also know that reduced water intake can lead to an increased risk of impaction colic. So what we did here is a little demonstration that was set up with buckets at 4 different temperatures initially, and it was -3 to -8 outside. And what we wanted to see is whether the warmer water took longer to freeze. Now this may seem like a strange thing, but there is a thing called the Mpemba effect, where in certain circumstances warmer water freezes more quickly than cold water. Sounds crazy, but this is a physical phenomenon. Now, as I say, it's not applicable in every situation. Not every scientist who's tried to do this has been able to reproduce it. But in the context we're interested in, is it important, or is it better for you to give your horse slightly warm water in the evening so that it stays warmer, encourages intake, and stays liquid, doesn't freeze as quickly? So let's see what happened. Well, the warmest water does actually cool the fastest, but it stays warmer for a lot longer. So you can see even after 3 hours, the water at 35 degrees centigrade was still at 15 degrees centigrade. So this would be encouraging your horse to drink more and reducing the risk of impaction colic. So the bottom line, if you put warm water, approximately 30-35 degrees in your horse's water bucket, it's going to stay warmer longer and take longer to freeze. And 35 degrees C or 95 degrees Fahrenheit is approximately your skin temperature under your clothing. So if you put your hand under your arm, that's sort of what 35 degrees centigrade feels like. Now, if you don't have running hot water at the yard, which a lot of yards don't, then of course if you've got electricity you can boil a kettle, or maybe even take a big thermos from home to provide warmer water. Now, if you're going to have a kettle, which is probably the most likely thing, how do you mix hot and cold water to get the right sort of temperature? Well, a typical kettle around 2 litres, 4 pints US. A typical bucket, 15 litres, 4 US gallons. If the water in that coming out the tap was 5 degrees centigrade, and you added that 2 litres boiling water to the 15 litres, you would get a temperature of around 15 degrees centigrade. Better than 5, definitely better than 5. Be nice if it was a little bit warmer. So if you take 2 kettles and you only fill the bucket 2/3 full, then you will end up with a temperature of 30 degrees centigrade, and that's going to stay liquid for probably most of the night, and your horse is more likely to drink from it as well because it's going to be warm. Next question that comes up a lot in this weather is whether it's okay for horses and ponies to eat frosty or frozen grass. Now, of course, we know wild horses and ponies do, of course, and they don't tend to have problems. But for domesticated horses and ponies, does this cause a problem? Well, the first thing many people think about is an increased risk of colic. But actually, as we've already sort of said, yes, colic does increase in cold weather, but it's mainly impaction colic. It's unlikely that it's due to eating cold or frosty grass. And this is because the mouth, inside the mouth is warm. The grass has to travel a long way, all the way through the mouth, down the esophagus, into the stomach. And it's unlikely that this is causing discomfort to your horse. If it's causing discomfort, they'll probably stop eating or reduce how much they eat. But in the stomach, the grass is going to warm. It's going to be probably at body temperature. It's a long way from the hindgut where we get colic. So the risk of colics other than impaction colic from eating frosty grass is probably very low. Now, there is another risk, of course, and that is from eating grass that is stressed, because stressed grass is high in sugar. And the 3 main causes of stress to grass, which results in high sugars in the grass itself, are overgrazing, drought, and cold. So if you have got heavily grazed paddocks and it's frosty, then you may want to be thinking about restricting your turnout if you've got a horse that you're trying to keep its weight down, or it's a laminitis prone horse or pony. And here we're talking about if the temperature is consistently below 5 degrees centigrade, and especially with sunny days, which increase photosynthesis, increase sugar production. It's best to keep horses and ponies off of that, or, you know, if you have to provide an alternative source of forage, hay or haylage, because it's high sugar, it is an increased risk for laminitic prone horses. So, increased risk of colic and cold weather. As we said, the main type of colic due to cold weather is impaction colic due to reduced water intake. And of course, this can occur because either your water troughs or buckets are frozen, or because we've already said when water is cold, horses tend to drink less than when it's slightly warm. And there is a small risk of colic due to horses being too cold through cold stress. Not so common, but it can occur. So, how do we reduce the risk of impaction colic? It's about keeping your horses hydrated. So, ensuring troughs and bucket are not frozen over, that's a given. Better to remove the ice than simply break it to slow refreezing. Warming up water in buckets when feeding or in the stable by adding some hot water. A slightly warmer meal may be more attractive, more palatable. We've talked about how to keep your water not frozen by placing it in stacked tyres and stuffing those tyres with straw. Heated buckets are often used in very cold climates like in the States and Canada. They're not cheap, they require mains, but they may still be worth considering if you have got a horse or pony very prone to impaction colic. It's still going to be cheaper than a vet's bill. So avoid feeding dry forage, I would say, in cold weather. We've said damping down feeds. You might want to consider adding half a 25ml scoop of salt a day to feeds if you're not already feeding salt or electrolytes. And again, steaming or soaking hay in warm water increases water intake. What about some other cold weather feeding tips? Well, providing more forage than normal, ideally as much forage as your horse wants to eat, unless of course you're struggling to manage weight. Avoid any sudden changes in routine at this time of year, especially avoiding sudden changes in feed. You know, if your horse is starting to lose a bit of weight, don't be tempted to suddenly throw in, 3 or 4 kilos of hard feed. That's a massive risk for colic. If your horse is struggling to maintain condition, slowly add in a low starch, low sugar, high energy, this normally means high oil, feed, such as cooked or micronized linseed. Mashes, a lot of people like to give a mash of some kind when it's cold. I'm not a great fan because it breaks our sort of one of our number one rules in feeding, which is no sudden changes. So if you feed a small mash every day, that's fine. But if you feed a big mash now and again, to me, that's just asking for trouble. And the other thing that helps reduce the risk of impaction colic in cold weather is movement. So again, if you can turn your horses out, even when it's cold, that's a good way to try and reduce the risk of impaction colic. And finally, we're coming back to rugs. Now, we often talk a lot about knowing when horses are too hot under rugs, but we also should be aware of what are the signs of when they're too cold. So first one could be they're lethargic. They're not moving around as much as they normally would. They're cold to touch, especially if that is under a rug over the shoulder area. So putting your hand in under the rug. If they go off their feed or they're not eating as much. If they look unhappy, if they look depressed, if they are shivering, that means they are cold. And again, colic can be a sign of cold stress in horses. So these are some signs that your horse or pony may be too cold. Of course, we always talk about the signs they're too hot, and I'm sure you'll be familiar with these. Sweating or moist to touch underneath the rug, changed behaviour, restless, not looking so happy, not normal behaviour, especially if they're kicking or biting at their rugs, almost trying to remove them, rubbing against objects, rolling, increased respiratory rate. They'd have to be quite warm for that to happen. Reduced appetite, or heat, sweat, sort of lumps and bumps under the rugs. All signs that your horse or pony may be too hot. Maybe your rugs, you've got too many rugs on, or too heavy a rug on. So if you've enjoyed that, then please follow us on one of our social channels. Lots of content. Hope that was helpful. Bye bye.